And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. My honor today to have on the podcast someone I consider a good friend and also one of the smartest individuals, if not the smartest person that I know, especially when it comes to technology. And I have enjoyed over the last couple of years a number of conversations with Christopher Teeter about artificial intelligence, how it's going to impact the church, how it's going to impact the family. This is something we're all hearing about. So I want to do actually 2 episodes. And the first one, we're going to tackle current trends and challenges. And then the second one, we're going to talk about opportunities. So Christopher, if you would, jump right in. Share a little bit about your background, what interests you in this topic, and kind of what brings you here today.
Yeah, Josh, thanks for having. We've talked about this for a while now, and I just, a big fan of your work and what you do for, community, for our state in Indiana, for citizens in the United States, and good citizens, and I really appreciate your work. Hey, so as you know, first and foremost, I'm a father of 5 and a grandfather of 2. Now, the reason that's relevant in this conversation is I have concern. I'm a concerned citizen as well as a good citizen when it comes to caring about where this technology, all technology, is taking and the pace and that it's moving. And sometimes we get a little bit ahead of ourselves in the introduction of things, and I've seen that. It's also relevant, Josh, because the ages of my young adult children put them all right in that sweet spot back in 2007, which a lot of things took off vis-a-vis technology that affected a generation of raising youth, and they were all at I had really an incubator of seeing a variety of ages and the impact on them as they grew into adults, and for good and for bad, right? So I can play both sides of that argument, but I think more what you were interested in is talking about my background, why am I qualified to talk about this, and it goes back to my university years where. Believe it or not, right here in the state of Indiana at Indiana University, they had some of the foremost thinkers in artificial intelligence. One of them, indeed, won a Pulitzer Prize for a book that he wrote on the topic, and I was honored to be part of a colloquium that studied that, and is also in a kind of a test group of computer scientists that way before we had large language models, we were writing systems that were learning systems and just talked about what could be someday when you didn't have to feed all the data in before processing it. Wow. When you didn't have to, dial up to get to a network that had computers that could process the things that you wanted to try. And so I've been able to watch it. And then in my career, did a number of things that companies are quick to put a label on them today, calling it artificial intelligence, but we call them things like learning systems, expert systems, heuristic systems, systems that would take very complex algorithms and come up with a solution that was very hard to trace backward and figure out where it came from. So we labeled that intelligence, but it was just really taking very complex algorithms, operating at very high speeds, using large amounts of data to get things done. So I was in, and to that end, Josh, I don't mean to take this too long, but I developed the skill of looking ahead to see where things are going and coming, and I've continued to try and hone that skill as I look at these coming technologies and affects people with our worldview.
So when I think of you, I think of a technology futurist, if I was to put it into kind of 2 words, and some work on Wall Street and the financial sector as well as the other technology sectors.
The reason that's relevant is so the exchanges, the Wall Street firms, and the large money center banks around the globe, those were the ones we would euphemistically call it the ones with the deep pockets. They afforded those systems first. We developed systems that, could, and I choose these words carefully, listen to their emails and read their voicemails way back in the late 80s, early 90s, right before people were even, in other industries, were even using email. So that kept me on the leading edge by working in that industry.
So share a recent highlight from your work, and you do lead the Hoosier Leadership Series Technology Day, and helping a lot of Christians, a lot of church leaders, other committed Christians kind of work through this stuff. So maybe share a recent highlight from your work.
Yeah. So in the Hoosier Leadership Series, we try and help educate the policymakers, the ones that help policymakers, the ones that want policymakers to understand the impact of coming legislations on families and the like. And so I think, we've seen just so many things coming at us so fast in the way of, who's going to decide and who decides the algorithms that go into an autonomous vehicle that makes decisions on, when you have a boy running into the street in front of a car, what does the car do? Who's going to get hurt? Is it the woman walking down the sidewalk on the far side of the sidewalk? Is the boy that's not where he's supposed to be, or is it the passengers in the car? And somebody has to make those. Today what we call an accident, in the future, an algorithm will decide who gets to decide that. That was maybe one of the biggest gee whiz moments in the last couple of years around that.
I remember one conversation because of autonomous vehicle tests. Certainly Fishers, Indiana, perhaps those outside of Indiana don't think of Fishers as a technology hub, but it's growing. Doing some autonomous vehicle testing, and someone raised that age-old question: who decides whether the driver dies or grandma and the grandkids die? And I remember the tech just looking at the person like, our car goes 35 miles an hour.
Yeah,
it's as fast as it goes.
Yeah.
And so fortunately we don't have to make that call, but we will have to make that call.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned to me several times this line, and I actually saw it on Twitter or X recently. And where's the Christopher Teeter byline here? But it goes along the lines of this: you will not be replaced by artificial intelligence, but you will be replaced by a human using artificial intelligence. Will you explain that statement?
Yeah. So that line's been attributed to many way before I started repeating it. But you won't be replaced by a typewriter, but you will be replaced by somebody using a typewriter, said nobody, 100 years ago, right? Or, then word processor, and then somebody using a computer to do their job. And this is the next evolution of that. I think that when and we'll define these terms later in our podcast, but when we talk about somebody using a large language model or a learning system or a heuristic system, that people using those tools, people using modern tools will replace people who, put hands over their eyes or fingers in their ears and refuse to learn them because they see something else going on. And that's been around since the beginning of time when it comes to dealing with the adaptation of new technologies. But in the biggest, back to the catchphrase, we fear what are people going to do with massive unemployment when AI takes over everything? Well, there's one time in our world that the growth of the telephone network and calling operators, we'd need everybody in the world, the population working as operators if they grew at the rate of phone usage, right? And so technologies come along to displace need. I'm going to drill down on an example of this that we haven't replaced any truck drivers yet with autonomous vehicles, right?
Sure.
Indeed, there's a massive shortage in the distribution logistics network of getting stuff from here to there safely, right? Yeah. And safely for not only the drivers concerned, but other people that use the roads and the systems, and that's only going to fill a gap in the near future.
So you have an audience here of church leaders and other committed Christians that want to make a difference in their community. Some of them are leading churches and trying to disciple folks. Others maybe a mom at home trying to raise kids, wrangle kids, and thinking, oh boy, here we're talking about technology again, and maybe a proverbial eye roll in a sense. So what are a few historical examples of the church and technology, and how has the church tended to respond to technology? As we jump into what we're saying, artificial intelligence is the next thing. Let's maybe learn a little bit from the past. What has the church done?
Yeah. These aren't, my stories that I research. I'm just repeating from examples that I've read. Going back even, before Christ, we had, Socrates frustrated with one of his pupils because he had made etchings on a stone tablet that of a speech he had heard in the town square. And now he's walking with Socrates in the countryside and looks down to these etchings, and Socrates is outraged because he doesn't want to learn from the etchings. He wants to learn from what's in your heart, what's in your soul, what's in your mind, and like now then fast forward to the church. Go back to, there's lots of examples in between, but the one that jumps out my biggest is Gutenberg and his printing press. Yeah. This just wasn't the way we were going to deliver the word, right? Yeah. And yet look at the reach now of the word due to
arguably no Protestant
books.
Reformation
Right.
without the printing press.
Yeah.
And
for Luther and just everything else bundled in there. Then you can come way ahead to this century and earlier in early in the early 1900s. There's a French theologian that I often cite during that Hoosier Leadership series that you can't ignore this stuff. A new technology will evolve, and it will be used, and you can't not see it. You can't not use it. There's a couple of counter examples of that. Thank goodness, nuclear bombs. They still exist though. But when we talk about social media, large language models, even autonomous vehicles as a productivity mean, blockchains and cryptocurrencies, which I doubt we get too much into, but I have examples of that too, and why those provide the security and safety around some of these other tools we're talking about. They will be used, and they might be used by nefarious characters for nefarious purposes, but that's been true of just about everything.
I think of one example that Adoniram Judson left the United States in 1812 on a steamship assisted by sails. So you have a missionary, using a ship for international travel and spreading the gospel. You also have ships sailing the oceans carrying slaves. So technology has always been this double-edged sword. The church at times, I think, has been reluctant to engage with technology, and I think that's often a problem. When you think of social media, many of us surely this won't catch on. And
right.
Now, here it is. So I think that is a lesson for us. Technology can be used, and as you mentioned, generally a new technology will be used with or without us. So let's be involved. Yeah.
Just for fun, there's other technologies that kind of screwed things up too. Okay. That you could, in a way, you could say, for a mother-child relationship, the worst invention of all time was the dishwasher. Where are you going with that, Teets? Used to be, if you go back 50s, 40s, 30s before, that after dinner, that stuff that didn't come out at the dinner table when Dad was there, because Dad would say, put on your big boy pants, life's not fair, that son or daughter, drying and washing the dishes with Mom, it comes out that so-and-so was mean to me at school, or I'm having trouble with this. And that's when, those problems came up. Instead, the dishes go in the dishwasher and everybody goes to their corners on their devices. Wow. Josh, even the garage door opener.
We've talked about
this. I know I've heard you repeat this one.
It's fascinating.
You get out, you open your door and you look, and there's Mrs. McGillicuddy across the street, and you wave and you say, "Hey, how you doing, Mrs. McGillicuddy?" And she goes, "Oh, the faucet's leaking and I don't know what to do. I can't use my kitchen sink anymore. Oh, let me put the car away. I'll come over and see what I can do to help." We were neighbors. Now we press the button, go in our car, the door closes, and we just drive right past them, right? So
another one.
These there's 100 of them.
And unintended consequences that I've certainly thought about in family formation would be the automobile, which certainly gave us mobility, but changed the way that we court and date, and taking the young women away from the home and supervision of the parents. So again, there's so many ways you can go with that, but technology has affected us, will affect us. Yeah. So certainly we could go deep
Yeah.
into these definitions, but just for somebody that's maybe studied this a bit, but also somebody that's coming to this new, just a couple of terms. Could you kind of differentiate, help us understand these terms: artificial intelligence, the Turing test, machine learning, artificial general intelligence? And again, listeners, don't let your eyes roll back to your head.
Yeah.
We need to know
Yeah.
these things. These are things we're going to have to
Yeah.
learn. So just some basic level definitions.
Yeah. So if you timeline some of those that you just said, back in the days of World War II, Alan Turing, some people think of the movie The Imitation Game because it was brought to light in that movie, but he built computers, pre-integrated circuits, using previous technologies to figure out patterns and the like on where the Germans would strike next. And there's a whole bunch of moral issues that went with that at the time, by the way. This an aside, not to your question, but I know where they're going to strike next, but it's not a big one. So we're going to let those people die because we want to stop the big one that will end the war, right? And wow,
Terrible dilemma.
Terrible dilemma.
Yeah.
But the Turing test they came up at the time would be asking questions via a computer interface that on the other end you don't know if it's the computer answering or the human answering, and that would mark some level of intelligence once you got to when you couldn't tell the difference. I think we're way past that, especially when it comes to anything mathematical that Turing didn't foresee that you got to slow that computer down because just the mere response to certain complex questions, the response time would take a human, days, weeks, months, years to complete. That comes back in milliseconds. Well, then that's a no-brainer. But more of the conversational type of things. But again, back in the early 1980s, there were systems called ELIZA that demonstrated a psychologist that every time you would say something, well, tell me more about your mother, right? Type of thing. It would be its go-to response and mimicking human intelligence. But we're so far past that, and where we get with what I'll describe next, large language models. So large language models are considered a sliver of artificial intelligence, but it takes the label of artificial intelligence in the modern discussion. I'm talking about the 2022, 2023, 2024 discussion of artificial intelligence. 9 times out of 10, we're talking about large language models. Your listeners will recognize companies like OpenAI and their ChatGPT product, Google and their Gemini product, Facebook and Lambda. These are tools, and there's dozens of them out there already. Yep. These are some of the biggies that paved the way, but these might become the AOLs of the internet someday because the development is so rapid and coming at us so fast. But those large language models really mimic the speech to text to text response of going out and generating a new response. It's different from search in that they aren't going out there and finding a pre-stored answer to things or giving the person who queries a list of things to choose from, but they're generating, that's the G in GPT, generating that new response each time, and it looks intelligent. We've got numerous examples, which I think we'll be getting into. Back to your,
I guess the question would be difference between, because everything is AI driven now.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is, well, large language model is actually the artificial intelligence, and it's a question of whether is it truly an intelligence, right?
Yeah.
But then I think the big one that you'll often hear summarized as AGI, artificial general intelligence. This is kind of the Skynet that becomes sentient. So would you dig into that for just a little bit?
Yeah. So a precursor to that. So I talk about large language models as one example. Expert systems. So expert systems are verticals that are have all the rules and have read all the data, had all the data as inputs for slivers of information. the medical expert, the logistics expert, the network management expert. When the network goes down, what went wrong? Is the computer unplugged? Is that, does it have anything to do with that backhoe down the street that just dug into the those wires that the guy with the yellow hat is holding up in the air, type of thing. There's expert systems that have replaced, this is back to the job replacement, replace the need for growth of thousands upon thousands of people that just do that one job. There's still just so many people doing that job, but the growth of the use of them made available by expert systems in that area that really make our network self-healing is an example. In the operating room, using tools, this one I'm a little bit more in the future, a doctor that has every open heart surgery's data, stripping the personal information, but all that data available to them for when they run into something that they weren't expecting, they can immediately know, well, yeah, this has happened, 1,283 times before, and these, 1,200 times, these 100 times we followed this solution, and all those patients are alive today. Well, we might want to go with that, right? Yeah. Type of thing. Those are expert systems. So now, to finally answer your question, artificial general intelligence doesn't have any of those slivers. It's just a total, repository of all knowledge across all branches of knowledge and everything. And so that's quite a ways off yet, but we see the constructs to getting to it, and the singularity, which I know you bring up here, coming at us fast and furious.
And so that's certainly just a brief overview. I encourage listeners to dive in. Again, we wanted to lay a bit of a foundation here. I know that was fairly technical, but I think it's important, and I think we need to understand the foundation. This is going to be a part of our point here. This is going to be part of our lives moving forward. So then, kind of where do we see it going in 3 to 5 years? And it's a little scary to even think 3 to 5 years, because now with GPT going 4.0, and then they're coming fast, at us, and the leaps that this technology is making. But if you would maybe just project as a technology futurist, just an idea of where this stuff is headed.
Yep. I'll stay away from technical here, but you and I have talked about a futurist, Raymond Kurzweil, who's been at this for a long, long time, and he wrote a book about the coming singularity in the early 2000s, 2004, 5, or 6, and he that title of that was "The Singularity is Near." Well, just a month ago, "The Singularity is Nearer" came out, and everybody thinks that means that the date's been pulled forward. Well, all he did in that book was confirm that his dates are right on, but now it's 20 years later, so it's nearer. And so it's funny you say 3 to 5 years, because 5 years from now is 2029, and that's the first milestone date in his book published back in 2006 that he's confirmed that everything's right on track, and that's when we start to achieve some of the, pass the Turing tests in all fields, and start down that very slippery slope to than what he calls the singularity, where machine intelligence outstrips human intelligence. And that's a lot to grasp.
Yeah, it's a little scary to hear. Yes, yeah. But everyone that I'm speaking to that's invested in this, has worked in this space, is saying, this is going to be transformative.
Yeah.
Something that we need to be aware of. So coming back again, you can dig down as deep as you want on these topics. What I want to do now is just try to think of practically, how is this going to impact the church leader? Why should the church leader care about this? And then why, would Christians, the committed Christians that are working in business, et cetera, why should we care about this? So what are some ways that this is going to practically impact Christians?
Yeah. I'm going to take a very positive view of this, but I'm going to start with a story that might not sound so positive. I mean, I remember this 2008, 2009 as a athletics coach to a young woman in high school. I was taught by them the way to get to them all-in-one communication was using some of these new tools, one being Facebook, another for mass communications was Twitter, now known as X. And so I I certainly knew of these tools and knew of the social consequences and alike, but never thought that I would be told that I needed to be, I was the one that was ahead of the game here, and I was being told by young women in high school that this is the way to communicate to everybody at once if I really wanted my messages to get across. So we started the groups on those things and so on. So then I turned right around, was sharing with my church's communications leader about the success of that, and did get that, hand out in front of my face, stop, we're not going to talk about that. And to defend him, it was because of everything that ended up playing out, how we, ruined a generation of young women with the like button, right? Yeah. And all the problems that created. But at the same time, that boat left the dock without that church, right? Mm. And they're playing catch up. So, back to why didn't we implement these tools with youth groups at the church where everybody has a skill set? The plumber that, I'm just really not going to be good in that nursery changing a diaper. But if Mrs. McGillicuddy from our earlier anecdote needs help with that plumbing, yeah, all I need to know about it, because I would gladly dedicate 4 hours every Saturday morning to helping other congregations of the church that are on a fixed income with my skill set. And I'm not good at changing diapers or leading the Bible study, right? But I want to come together as community and help out. And these tools would just be phenomenal at that. And we yet to see the full implementation of those type of applications.
Yeah, so we're going to go through some challenges now.
Okay.
And hopefully listeners aren't too discouraged by going through a few things, because next time we're going to go through some opportunities that we will have as a church. But I know we were talking about Instagram or Facebook Messenger, and how even Meta has come out and admitted that, look, this was not healthy for social comparison among young women.
Yep.
Some things that I think of, this will transform a lot of job markets. All right, that's going to disrupt a number of different types of jobs. We also think of, family formation.
Yep. Yep.
We're going to talk a bit about the dating scene and what AI might mean for that. But then just what does it mean to be made in the image of God in contrast to artificial intelligence? And then we think about people just showing up in person in spaces. I mean, that is the definition of the New Testament church, right?
Right.
And if everything is virtual and everybody has an AI pastor, these are just some really profound things we need to be aware of. So jumping into a couple of specifics, the first challenge I was thinking of, and we've discussed, is kind of transhumanism, a confusion in between humans and robots and artificial intelligence. As you said, if all of these differing learning models, large language models, pass the Turing test, you can't tell the difference between that machine and a human.
Right.
So would explain a little bit of how that's going to be a challenge.
First of all, so just putting some meat on the bone to the definition of transhumanism. Transhumanism, when we and then that leads to posthumanism. That's that singularity. But the transhuman is that transition where, it's the use of technologies to perform our everyday functions and along. Well, we're already there, right? Yeah, we both anecdotally know people that can't get to the place that they travel to, 200 times a year without turning on their navigation system, right? Because that's just the way they get from here to there. It's what they witnessed their parents doing growing up, and it's the way they do it now. And they wouldn't know which way to turn out of the cul-de-sac if they didn't have their navigation turned on.
We would be helpless. It might be one of those.
And so we could be there. And Josh, guy running for office here in the state of Indiana, looked at me one day, and he didn't want to hear this stuff, and he says, it's all making us dumber. It's just making us dumber and dumber. And as I'm an experienced man. I'm considered the senior by some, at least on the golf course type of thing. And I constantly am making myself go through the alphabet, learn that, remember that thing rather than just looking it up on my phone. And we need to be careful because we use them as crutches for so many things that we we forget how, and getting way ahead of ourselves. The answer to that's just turn it off. You need to have technology sabbaticals. You need to go on a walk. You need to climb a mountain. You need to experience God's creation all around you, and remember, you need to do a little Walden, right?
And that brings up a great point of it's the observation that some of the most progressive kind of atheistic secular places, plural places in the United States are in large cities where folks don't get into nature. They don't see the created order. I think it's another aspect of that. One author says that we were created as carbon-based, like embodied people, that rather than like a silicon robot. And even God himself, came to be with us. Yeah. And we're made in the image of God. And I think these lines are going to be blurred quickly. There was a great anecdote of this. I was teaching about artificial intelligence or some cultural challenges with a group of Christian school teachers and leaders a few weeks ago, and this teacher shared a story. I'm like, hey, can we just change? Like, you come up to the mic, I'm going to go sit down. Yeah. Because she was talking about a student that used artificial intelligence to create a book report of one of the classics. And it was very apparent that the ChatGPT or AI, large learning model, had written it. And of course, the student gets a bad grade for basically plagiarism. But instead of just saying, hey, you fail, don't do that again, she just pulled that student aside. And what she said, I thought was just so beautiful. She said, do you understand like why you're failing this? It's because you've used an AI to create this, but you understand by doing so that you're diminishing the image of God in you. And that part of being made in the image of God means that we're a creator, we're a sub-creator. And no one has written a book report on this book in your voice. And so you're stealing from the world your creativity, diminishing the image of God in yourself by doing that. And I was just like, drop the mic. That's exactly what we're saying. So just that pull day in, day out. Oh, maybe I don't need God. Like these technology is all I need. And I think that's going to offend or at least distract from that truth.
The authors of those books, dead and living, intended for the reader in that book to be having a personal experience for the reader, and not not anything else, not a collaboration with the tools. And then I can jump right on the other side of the fence and say, there's stacks of books out there that I always said, gee, I'm going to read that when I grow up. And I'm still going to read them when I grow up. Yeah. But one recently that I tried with the assistance of a large language model, and I got so much out of it that it propelled me to complete it. Yeah. And there's a number of these books in the archives that we can learn how we got to where we are as humanity, that how our Constitution was motivated and stuff like that, and that we all need to understand those, read those, but we wouldn't be able to understand them in either their original language or some of the old English that they were written in and stuff like that.
So listeners can tell I am like kind of pulling Christopher with me down this path of their challenges, because Christopher is we would say Pollyannish or Pollyanna about technology, and there's so many things about even education we'll get into. We'll come back to that. I'm trying to drag him down the challenges. He's like, no, it's great.
no, don't do that.
So I appreciate Christopher. Yeah. So a couple other challenges, and these could be kind of scary things. We dug into this in the podcast a bit with Ambassador Sam Brownback, but the idea of geofencing, that companies know who's in a church at a particular time, and this is why you see an ad for the store you drive by. But then when you connect that with something like facial recognition, and the social credit system that's being rolled out in China, Brownback mentioned that the state government in China can even monitor your emotions. They know your gait as you walk, but as you're walking into the factory or to the party meeting, do you look happy? And if not, do you get docked? Yeah. And we say, well, not here. And of course, a story came out this last week that Facebook, pushed back on, hey, we were told by the U.S. government to censor certain data coming out. So this is, a real concern when you talk about a large language model or singularity that has the capability to see all of the cameras in the United States and figure out where you are and track all of your history. These tools, as you think about human history, the need for control, tyrannical governments, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see how they're going to be used in a terrible way.
So Josh, yeah, Pollyanna that you were referring to there in a couple minutes ago, just a week ago, I had a comeback for you on that, and then the Facebook thing came out that our own government. But I'm going to go and tell you what my comeback used to be. For all the ill that social media has done, there are at least easy to count 1.2 billion people on our planet now that live under democracies versus the autocracies that they were under because of like the Arab Spring. Before that, it was fax machines that led to the developments in Tiananmen Square, and so these tools can bring about good. Any enhanced communications between parties is good, but again, falling into the wrong hands, and I would hate to think that there's that could have been gotten away with, that a duly elected government by the people would be able to influence a technology provider to suppress something in the fashion that Zuckerberg describes it occurred.
The idea...
It's hard to get the genie back in the bottle, though, right?
This is true.
These tools there, you can choose lots of metaphors. We can't get the genie back in the bottle, so we need to say, how do we, as we discussed before, we've been dealing with changing technologies for a long time. We can't stick our head in the sand and say, no. We gotta rise to the occasion and be there at the table as good citizens to help mold these in the very image, in God's image that you were describing earlier. And so that says keep it human along the way.
And
right?
The particular example I was thinking of, and this came up in the recent HLS day on training model poisoning. And the idea being, all right, so you ask ChatGPT, debate the points in between a flat Earth and the Earth is round and is a planet. And some of the models have now been trained to say, well, the flat Earth is completely debunked by scientists, which we agree with. All right, for the record, no flat Earthers over here. But what if the model is trained to say, well, scientists have discovered or conclude that there is no God? So who gets to make who gets to make the input that then explains the arguments for and against certain beliefs, and whether or not Christianity is given a fair shake when a 12-year-old wants to use ChatGPT and is struggling with issues in life, says, does God exist? So again, challenges, certainly opportunities.
I acknowledge that as a challenge. I'd like to say, for the time being, if you haven't been on one of these tools, take your Bible study question of the day and put it into a large language model as a test, and it's remarkably good at helping you along the way and maybe filling in blanks to the question that you didn't even consider coming out of the answer. I've had remarkable success with them that have helped not hinder my ever pursuit of our faith. But I recognize your concern. Yeah. But I'm gonna take the Pollyanna road on that for now.
I'm grateful.
Just for now. Yeah.
And
it's ChatGPT for one has read the Bible.
Yes, that was one of the fun comments discussions we had. Yeah, ChatGPT has read the whole Bible, folks. And all the commentaries and everything else.
It took a millisecond.
Right. I've been doing it for an entire year. But one example of this, and just the use, was I put together a presentation on 4 challenges for Christian ministries. A cultural challenge is actually a podcast episode recently. And then just double checked after I'd created it with ChatGPT, what should ministry leaders know? And it actually was very close to what I created. I did note that the AI said the development of AI was the first cultural change that we should be aware of.
Yeah.
But so right now it is actually, I think, remarkably even-handed. And those that are creating these models have done a good job. So another challenge that thinking about, and this does dovetail a little bit into the concern over the image of God, but video games and a metaverse is kind of an alternate reality, the rise of AI-generated pornography, and people just kind of living in this separate reality. I think you had some stats at one point, and you may not have them in front of you, but just how many people were playing, for example, like Call of Duty at one point, and just what does that mean moving forward with people that aren't really engaging in real life?
Yeah, the stat there, and maybe we can follow up in the
Yes,
podcast notes with the number. There's a very large number, way more than hundreds of millions, that any given moment around the globe, 18 to 30-year-old men on a one of the top 3 video games. It combined the 3, and I'm loose on details at my fingertips on those, but everybody would recognize the names of those.
Sure.
And it's funny because when you peel back the pages and you see who owns some of these companies, it's those same people that we keep seeing, the big $6 trillion companies that they're all playing in that market, and we need to return to values for those things, because it's going to change birth rates when young men are off doing this stuff, and seeking fulfillment through video games and some of the other things you mentioned there, and that's a real concern. But we need to work early on in education, which I think we're probably going to talk about in our next session, to kind of have a revival of the order and the timing of when we take on these new technologies for our youth. We don't let them vote till a certain age. We wouldn't let them go to war at a certain age. We don't let them drive till a certain age. We don't let them purchase alcohol until a certain age. And certainly putting these hands on the tools before they've developed the right value systems of their family, that know what's the difference between right and wrong, before turning it over to the interwebs, if you will, to develop those values in them.
And we've discussed at times the difference between the technological industrial revolution of the 1800s, so maybe comparisons, and maybe not learning the lessons of during the Industrial Revolution sent children to work in the mines and in the factories, and eventually William Wilberforce and others started to pass laws saying, hey, we're not going to send our kids to die in the coal mines. And now we have an entirely new technology. We don't know how it impacts your brain, but here you go. 12-year-old. The other point that you make at times, and I think the word is homify, anthropomorphize. We're really pulling out the thesaurus now, folks. Why are we homifying robots? And, how does that play into this?
Yeah, we have so many processes that the intelligent agent, or the artificial intelligence, or the intelligent assistants, or the Apple intelligence could help us go about our normal task. But why do we need to homify it? Meaning, make it look like a human. The iRobot and the science fiction movies that look more and more non-science fiction every day. They take the form of a robot, and we talk about the horror story, and I mean, this is 5 years old now, that Saudi Arabia gave citizenship to a robot, and then way more recently they asked the robot that question, and it's using a large language model, of course, to answer it, and says, well, it makes me, instead it makes the algorithms, it makes me more approachable, and you can trust your biggest, most complex queries to me, because you're not talking to some other kind of machine for that assistance. Now, if you really push me, I can poly in on this and say, well, I could see that in the form of a teacher's assistant in the classroom in teaching Johnny to read, right? Because all these kids in the class are learning at a different rate, and if we had a few intelligent assistants there to help Johnny read, well, Johnny don't want to stand there. Well, maybe he does stare at the screen, but if you hominified it and in the form of a robot reading Run, Spot, Run, and the like to him, then maybe there's something to that. Yeah. There's actually a book club novel that makes it. I won't say it because that'll be a spoiler alert, but maybe we'll put up a reading list or something that it's a very easy way to enter that mindset of thinking about the goodness of hominifying the technology. But in general, I'm not a fan.
I'm just laughing. The listeners like, yeah, Josh is over. It's just horrible. And Christopher's like, oh no, it's actually all right.
So there I go again.
Actually, it's actually part of this conversation. We have concerns. but also there are some arguments why it could be helpful.
Yeah.
We're used to interacting
Yeah.
with humans. Now, one thing that certainly concerns me is we've talked a little bit about singularity, and most of the folks that I'm studying is maybe that is a possibility, but that's why we need to be engaged. But I will say there's a book by Kissinger talking
Right.
about AI
Yeah.
and what happens when most of your army is a drone army, and are you more willing to go to war if your army is robots
Right.
rather than human beings? But the big idea that I took away from all of that was you want countries that are committed to the rule of law and to democracy and to human rights to have better AIs.
Yeah.
Because, again, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. And do you want a secular state that is given to using all of these technologies and just making humans a number, a commodity? Or do you want the democracies in the world? And we're not perfect. We critique the American system all the time.
Yeah.
But that's certainly something that is of concern. And something you mentioned at one point of AI has watched all of our sci-fi movies, which
Right.
is
Yeah.
a frightening
Yeah.
concept.
Yeah.
But anything else along those lines of as we look towards the future, just kind of global impact of this technology?
Yeah. The I mean, you answered your own questions there, I think, but the concept of a the field troops being robots out of a Star Wars movie with the I'm not sure of all the vernacular Star Wars movies, but everybody can picture the army of robots. To me, that's like any other tool, like the gun itself, or the certainly like the it wasn't until the after World War I when we started building up the big Air Force fleets. We didn't even call them that, to begin with, and then everybody had them. So it became a whole new strategy of dealing with by land or by air or by sea, right? And now it's just another dimension to warfare that will save human lives, right? If we're taking over, or at least the victors, right? I'm not sure. I kind of walked around that one, but I do see the platoon of robots as just another tool.
And
In like fashion, we can send those robots in to de-arm the nuclear devices or the landmines where we don't have to send a human soldier in to do it, right? And they'll be better at that job, by the way, and they can do it at night.
And I'll take the Pollyannish approach and say, well, now you're saving the human life, the image bearer, and letting the robot go in. We're just going to conclude there with some of the challenges. I think it's going to, as we've talked about, impact every area of our lives. And just coming back, though, to that thought of being made in the image of God, and I was talking to an individual recently, hopefully to have on the podcast in the future, talks about how creation of AI and kind of metaverses, it is actually maybe one of the highest forms of creativity.
Right.
We're actually acting in that image-making, sub-creator role in creating these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And it'll never be the carbon-based, human being with a soul, but it is an aspect of that. So I think it is a beautiful thought.
Yeah.
Terrifying thought.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Jonas Salk, Louis Pasteur.
Yeah.
These are different kind of this. We aren't talking about information technology or AIs, but we're talking about the things that they came up with and the save life. Fertilizers, right? And crop yields. The technology, that. Again, I point to our own state's role in that out of Purdue University to feed the world, right? Used to go by the crops of even 40 years ago versus crops today. Right. So you look at the way the technologies along these different fronts can save humanity. It's you can play both sides. Yeah.
So we'll leave it on kind of that positive note. We've gone through a lot of negative stuff. I appreciate Christopher tempering that. So with this one, we'll conclude there and just have a kind of billboard question for you. And then next time we will jump into some practical ways, maybe to think through. And listener, maybe if we've missed something that you were thinking about, we'd love to hear from you. Josh, a good citizen .us. We'll also have some books in the show notes for you. So if you had a billboard in which to put a message to the Big C Gospel Preaching Church around technology, what would you put on it?
The first Pollyanna message is don't be left behind. Have you taken a large language model to lunch today? Right? If you haven't tried one out and are running from them, it's time to give it a go, give it a try. But then you're going right down the highway, and then there's another billboard. It's 11 p.m. Do you know where your children's devices are? So maybe we can pick up on that then in the next round. Yeah.
Christopher, thank you for joining us and sharing your expertise. And we'll look forward to jumping into some of the opportunities. And it'll be a little bit more hopeful.
Very good.
Next one.
Yes.